everyone, how's it going? So, some of you might be a bit confused as to why I have this stack of kits here in front of the Weird Tails, while some of you might be wondering why I'm even reviewing a model kit to begin with. If this next part doesn't interest you, feel free to skip ahead to see the Mecha Pupper, as this doesn't have anything to do with the review, but with it being the first one on the channel, I felt there was some explanation needed for those who have already been watching my videos. So, up until recently, I've only done Arknights related content, so I could understand if there is some confusion as a whole, but I always wanted to pursue the various passions of mine on YouTube, so it wouldn't ever be limited to just one type of content. I'm by no means dropping Arknights lore. In fact, there's actually another segment I'm going to start doing soon, but I also don't want to get burnt out with Arknights. And with that being said, the reason for these kits being here right now is because I'm actually doing a kit bash to create my favorite Arknights operator, and kind of do an attempt at getting fans of either community to check out the other, but no pressure. Anyways, I imagine it's probably pretty obvious as to who it'll be, but you'll still have to wait for the big reveal. So, this is the Weird Tails by Kotobukiya, and wow, I did not know what to expect going into this, but I fell in love. So far, I've been building Gunpla for actually a little over a year exactly as I'm writing this. I got a high-grade Barbatos Lupus Rex to start off and was just absolutely hooked from there. Now, I know some people can build more Bandai kits than I will ever do in my lifetime, but after a year of making them pretty consistently, I just needed something to change up the pace. Now, I had been looking around and this thing, the Weird Tails, well, it caught my eye, and I was debating on it for a while, but ultimately, I'm so happy I got it because it's absolutely gorgeous, it's super fun to pose. The sheer amount of things you can do with the customization on this, I mean, everything that needs to be checked off is there to make a model kit maker happy. I do have some comments about a few things that I'll bring up as they become relevant, but outside of that, honestly, I couldn't be happier with the kit. Now, to start off with what you get, you have a total of 16 runners. 7 off-white, 4 red, 7 gunmetal that are ABS plastic, 1 polycap runner, and 1 clear blue that is used for the eyes. This also includes a fully colored instruction booklet and what I'd like to describe as a postcard-sized graphic with what I imagine is lore about the mech, while the box that contained it all is comparable to a larger master grade. Now, since I've been using Bandai's products as kind of a baseline, as we move on to the build, I just have to say that it's on par in terms of quality. The instructions are very clear and straightforward. The build wasn't simple by any means, but I could definitely see this being a beginner-friendly kit, because honestly, the plastic was easier to clean up than a lot of Gunpla kits I've built, looking at you, Epion. But I do have to mention that the inner frame or gunmetal parts as a whole will leave behind a deposit of slightly darker color from when the kit was originally made, but for the most part they're not too prevalent. The only one that's of real notice is right here on the mouth, and it bugs me a bit, but I got over it. Now, one thing I wanted to do with my reviews is show a comparison between different kinds of nippers, and at the moment I only have the two. One being a $20 pair of God Hands, and the other being a $50 pair of God Hands that are pretty well used. But in the future, I would like to get more to kind of give you all a comparison between the different kinds and just how they would leave marks on the kits. That way you can have a better idea of what to expect when you're building it. Now, as some of you may expect with the $20 pair, there were a lot more stress marks, but what impressed me is, on the second cut, they removed the nub pretty well. It seems pretty clean at least, on the inner frame especially, but less so with the colored pieces. At first glance, it looks pretty clean, but when you actually touch it, the surface is definitely rougher, and you are more than likely risking making a crater with that. As for the $50 pair, if you have a brand new set and or take your time with making sure you're even with how you approach each and every little cut, you could probably avoid sanding this thing altogether. I, on the other hand, really enjoyed this kit, so after I did the test marks, I was leaving a bits of nub to sand off, but with the delicate touch and some patience, yeah, you could probably just skip the cleanup process altogether. I'll give y'all a chance now to see the comparisons between the different cuts. Now, when it came to the actual cleanup, I personally only used the razor glass file for all but the hardest to reach places. For those, I just use a 800 and then 1000 grit softer sandpaper. But yeah, no, it was super easy to clean up the whole thing. There's really not that many noticeable marks besides on the red here and there. That one was kind of weird. I felt like it would either be completely seamless, no deposit color anything, or there'd be like a slight hint of it there. Oddly enough, kind of 50-50. Now, I think this next part could possibly be what makes the Anubis-faced mecha pupper thing a hit or miss for some people's shopping carts. Everything incorporated that's supposed to move is super solid and stays together without any modifications. I just have one small complaint with the feet, because despite how awesome they look, well, they're the least remarkable thing about the kit in my opinion. So, I don't have any issues getting some great poses, it's just that I feel like the lack of any articulation towards, well, any direction outside of forwards and backwards is just a bit disappointing. You could technically face it at a different angle, but yeah, it just doesn't look right. Here and on a few other parts, we put the Hexa in Hexa Gears, and while it is usually very snuggy, I meant to say snug and grippy, but the combined. Anyways, these back feet and another spot I'll mention later seem to like to come off without much effort despite having the power of the hexagon. But once posed, you really shouldn't see them falling off without you physically bumping into them. But in all fairness, they're really not that bad. I just felt it was only fair to mention the parts that fell off frequently during the process, and yeah, that was only happening with the back feet and these front shoulder spalder things. But those have an excuse as they're one of the only things connected by a ball joint besides the head. Moving on to how the rest of the kit, well, moves, we have pretty good articulation with all four limbs. There's some difference between the front and back pairs when it comes to them actually folding up, but as for rotation, all four of them have the same range of movement when they're unhindered by the armor around them. And on that note, I have to mention another thing that I think a lot of people will like. So if you don't want these pieces in the way, you can take them off without leaving any naked joints behind. They will actually slide on in front of the limb and stay out of the way without too much effort, and look pretty good if I do say so myself. Another interesting thing to note is that the placement of these little hexagon slots is actually both aesthetically pleasing and functional. It's pretty crazy what all you can do with this. Your options are pretty limitless, whether you want to combine two of one kit to create a six-legged version as I faked doing right here, or a kit bash of your own hybrid. There's definitely some options here that I'll be sure to explore in some future reviews, and here in the back of it, it even shows you kind of combining it with the wings from another kit, and just, yeah, there's tons of what you can do with this. Now, as for the hatch on this, it does everything it needs to and can actually connect into the top of the seat to keep it fastened in place.
Careful when you're pulling these off. I would definitely not grab it by these. I would grab it by this part in the middle.
Underneath all of that, you have a kind of motorcycle-styled seat with a couple of monitors, two handlebars, and some foot pegs. The handlebars are the only thing you'll ever hear rattling on this kit, and if you really wanted, they're actually completely removable, so you have the ability to have a rider that is more exposed, or if you wanted to try to portray something that's entirely autonomous, yeah, you have that ability. I definitely could have showcased this better, but it totally doesn't look out of place if you take off the hatch and the computers. If you want something that's a little more, well, as natural as a mecha canine can get, natural look, yeah, right out of box, you have the ability to do that. Now, to get actually in depth with the limbs and the feet, the limbs can be posed completely straight out or folded up with a good range of movement, but don't expect them to completely fold up. Like I mentioned before, the feet aren't anything really insane and have no rotation or side to side, so that's all there is to that. Looking up at the neck and head now, you can see that it's pretty good with the up and down movements, as it has a point of articulation at the base of the neck, and further in if you move the head out of the way, you can see another point of movement where a ball joint segment connects the two pieces. Now, I would not try to pull off the head like you would a Gunpla. In the instructions, you actually sandwich the two pieces around it. But yeah, I really didn't even want to risk breaking that joint, so I didn't even attempt it. Now, despite the head being on a ball joint, it doesn't actually get too much in the rotation department as it relies more on the neck to look around. It can actually move all the way around, and well, I'll just take it out at this point to show you the rest. The red spike antenna things are able to rotate all the way around, but that's all they'll do. As for the ears, they're actually another part I absolutely love, as they can be posed in so many different manners, and what direction you pose them in can really change what kind of caniness depicts. In addition to this, their range of motion is actually pretty good, and if you wanted to get creative with it, you could probably make something up about the ears coming together for an attack if you were to pose the right effect pieces. Who knows? Honestly, this thing just has so much that you could do to personalize it, and I love that. Now, if you're wondering what that mouth do, it does enough. It does what it needs to do. It swings up and down, and if you have a look inside here, we do have something that looks like it could fire off a beam or maybe something else. But yeah, it does the job it needs to do, and that's about it. Now, here on top of the neck, we have this layer of armor that does have some movement to it in addition to being easily removable. And I just feel like this and the parts on the ligaments are all in the same vein where it does not look out of place to take them off if you really didn't want them there. Now, since the peg for that piece of armor and the hatch were the same size, I went ahead and took the liberty of demonstrating this kind of awkward looking but fully supported pose you could go with in place of it, just to show you that you really do have a lot of different things you could try out, whether you want this facing forwards or backwards. I didn't think it looked as bad as I once thought once I was messing with the footage, but yeah, in the moment I was just kind of like, this is ridiculous. Now, anyways, after getting them back to a semi-normal state, it's time to prop them up for a size comparison with good old Nautilus here. I figured Nautilus would be a good contender based off the general size and color scheme that they were rocking, so yeah. Now, the Weird Tails is a little taller than Nautilus when standing on its own, but if we were to actually straighten it out, you can see the entirety of this kit and just how much there is to it when it comes to its size. I also went ahead and borrowed my roommate's AG RX-78 just to give a size comparison to any of your 1/144th scale kits. Now at this point, some of you may be wondering, just where is the tail part of this Weird Tails? And we're going over that next. I just wanted to cover the kit without it attached first, as you may be like me and prefer them deployed, but honestly, it was mainly for the sake of not having to reattach it every time they fell off, as the point here is probably the loosest connection we have in terms of the hexagon pieces. As you could probably tell by some of the footage for the intro and the box art, the Weird Tail has some almost Gundam funnel/bit-like features, and just the sheer amount of poses that they can make, both individually and in tandem, is insane. There are 3 of these sections that can be attached to the base of the tail. Each of these segments has 2 red blades that are very posable and removable, but be careful with these because they're actually quite sharp at the end of them and were poking the heck out of me throughout the process of everything. Now they can be rotated all the way around in this direction while it can only move about half the range in this other direction. But you really won't have any issues posing this, as the part that connects it to the tail will give you all the articulation you need to get some awesome setups. So for the tail itself, the range of motion on it isn't anything crazy, as it only has a small bit of up and down movement, but you can make up for that with the segment connecting it to this piece here, which is kind of the base of your deployable section. You do have to be careful when you're adjusting everything though, as they can pop off when pushed too far in one direction, and you can start to see here you'll probably have to make some minor adjustments when you're putting it back onto the main body, just because once you've rotated them into the right spot, it might bump into something else as you're putting it back into the rest of the kit. But once you do have everything positioned in the right way and oriented to where it's all in the manner that you want, you'll have a kit that is as elegant as it is menacing. There are a few poses that it demonstrates you setting them up in throughout the manual, which are very easy to achieve, and I even found a few new ones that I was able to make up on my own, but my personal favorite has to be when they are in this sort of trifecta attack thing, especially after I added in the wireless LEDs. and also to give you an idea of what they can do with some minor modifications, though I legitimately was just putting one in the back of the mouth and the other 3 were just little bits of foam from the packaging cut to fit around them and fill the gap. In case you're wondering, the wireless LEDs I have are from Hobbynetics. I got mine from USA Gundam Store, but I'm sure there's someone else out there who carries their products. Just know that you will need the base to make these work, they are not battery powered. Now, one thing I was not expecting when I got this kit was a transformation, and let me tell you, this is a transformation Mecha Gaikatsu Senpai over there would appreciate, as there is only one part you have to add on to create this. And that is literally just to prevent the bottom tail from dangling when it is transformed. So anyways, I went ahead and followed the instructions to a T the first time going through this, despite wondering if any removal was actually necessary when looking at the final result. And it definitely makes it easier, but I wouldn't say that you need to take them off by any means to make this transformation happen. It'll just give you some extra clearance so you're not bumping into other parts in the process. And I won't lie, I didn't really like the way this looked in person, but on camera, it's kind of grown on me. Here's where I did notice something I wanted to mention. So we have this belly button looking slot that I mentioned before that it plugs into for this mode, and we have a poly cap here in front of that to hold it up. But when you actually get it on here, it does feel like it might be a little bit too much weight for that one poly cap to hold up. However, I did try these both by themselves, and I did need to mention that the, well, belly button connection did start to have the edge warp a little bit from the sheer weight of this, so I would definitely stick to either just using the poly cap or trying to distribute that weight, because it does feel like there's just a little bit too much, and they don't really include a legitimate stand or connection point for this to be put up in the air or any dynamic poses. Just make sure you're moving up to a beefier stand like one of these action bases, because this one barely held up the transformation and there was no way that it was going to hold up this dynamic pose. Now, to tie everything back together for how I feel overall towards this kit, I have to admit that I was a bit hesitant about trying a non-Bandai kit after seeing so many mixed reviews between different products. Not just with Kotobukiya, but with them in particular, it seems that they had a fair bit of difference when it came to the quality, amount of work, and/or supplies needed to build some of their kits. But with all that aside, I love everything about this kit, from the aesthetics to the tail drones, and I'm really excited to actually see what else Hexa Gear has to offer. I didn't get a commander this time around, but I'll try to include one with the next Hexa Gear thing I review, because I have quite a bit of variety. But to give a better idea of their scale, that would probably help out. But in this moment, I can't, help but think that these look pretty damn good as a not-so-furry friend for the master grade size kits. Now, to wrap this all up, I have to say that, all in all, I love this thing so damn much. I've never built a Zoid myself, but I've seen many reviews on them, and I can kind of imagine this being like a middle ground between getting your more animal-themed mechs without having to throw down as much money for a Zoid, or deal with things like glue and just the overall more complicated nature of those kits. So yeah, despite not really knowing what to expect going into this, I am so glad that I pulled the trigger and got the Weird Tails. Next thing I actually have to check out is this weird little adorable cat-footed robot thing. I tell you what, it's also from Kotobukiya, and after the Weird Tails, I gotta say I'm pretty stoked on seeing how this next build goes. If you're interested in actually watching the process, I've been streaming the build on Twitch to avoid spoiling this on YouTube, but yeah, I don't know, maybe in the future I'll stream on here or do like a split thing where you can go to both platforms. I don't know, we'll just see how it goes in the future. Anyways, thank you all so much for taking the time to watch this. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day.